Good morning or good afternoon. This is Miranda Sazo from Cornell Corporate Extension from New York, next to the Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario. We would like to give you a welcome to the 5th season of the International Virtual Orchard Meetups program. We are very pleased that you have decided to join us. We are going to be talking about the impacts of weather on pome fruit quality and storability, lessons from 2025. The 2026 series is sponsored by a national team of researchers and extension specialists working on a multi-year USDA SCRI project focused on evaluating management practices to reduce crop losses from severe cold and heat events. This large collaborative effort is known as SPARK. We had two excellent speakers with us today. First, Dr. Lee Kalscits from the Department of Agriculture at Washington State University, who served as principal investigator and project lead for SPARK, will provide a brief overview of the project. We will then hear from Dr. Sonia Hall from the Center for Sustaining Agriculture and Natural Resources at Washington State University, who will summarize key findings from a research SPARK grower survey. So Dr. Kalscits, please go ahead with your presentation, and thank you very much for being here with us today.
All right. Thank you, Mario. Thanks for the introduction. So I'm going to go. So I'm going to just give a brief introduction to this large national project that we're leading that's focusing on strengthening pear and apple resilience to climate. And when we think about climate, we're really focused on, for this project, on extreme temperatures. So what goes on, extreme temperatures, not just in the summertime, but also in the wintertime. So this project, we initially got started building this team in 2020. And it was in response to some challenging years we've had over the previous 5-6 years before that of just losses due to unseasonably warm or unseasonably cold or temperatures that deviate from the standard weather that we would normally experience in the different seasons. So this is a project that extends across 7 institutions across the United States, spread geographically across the U.S. and the main apple and pear growing regions of the United States. So we have Washington State University, Penn State, Cornell University, University of Maine, Michigan State University, Oregon State University, and then the U.S. Department of Agriculture, ARS, both in Wenatchee, Washington, and in Geneva, New York. We also have a wide range in expertise. We have plant breeders, molecular biologists, we have physiologists and applied pomologists, and we have modelers and economists and a wonderful group of extension specialists that all work to support this project and fulfill the goals that we've set forth. So it's a really good team. We initially got this project funded in 2024 so we're about a year and a half into a 4 to 5 year project. So we're just starting to ramp up some of our research outputs and then also focusing on the extension outputs of the project. So what is Spark? So we have some within this group, we kind of have some underlying activities that kind of common activities that we're focused on. One, looking at evaluating the temperature damage mitigation strategies. So Mario mentioned this. These are the applied strategies to reduce losses from extreme cold or heat events. We want to build models that allow for better risk assessment and cultivar selection. So growing apple and pear cultivars in the places that they're going to be the most successful and grow the best quality, the most fruit with the best quality in the United States. So helping growers select cultivars that will be successful in their regions and understanding risk. Because risk is complex. It's based on probabilities. So the better models we have, the better we can understand that risk. we want to characterize the physiological and genetic mechanisms of so understanding the hows and whys that cold and heat affect plant health and fruit yield and fruit quality. And then we want to really get into understanding the genetic control of some of these traits. They're complex. How trees respond to their environment, how fruit responds to their environment is complicated. It's not just one gene that does that. It's multiple traits, multiple pathways that are affected. So understanding the genetic control of these really important traits to then inform future scion and rootstock breeding to develop varieties that are more adaptable to a broad range in climates. And then we want to develop durable extension materials on heat and cold damage mitigation for pome fruit. So I went through this a little bit before, but we're really focused on all four seasons because there's extreme temperature events that can create losses in all throughout the year. So we have a one goal that is focused on low temperature and one goal that is focused on high temperatures. So the low temperatures in winter and spring, looking at acclimation in the fall, maintenance of cold hardiness and dormancy during the winter, and then the risk of that timing of bud break and flowering in the spring. And then for high temperatures, we're focused on fruit sunburn during the summer from extreme heat, and also that really difficult time when the fruit is getting close to harvest and getting proper red color, specifically for bicolor apple cultivars, which make up the majority of apples produced in the United States right now. The third goal is focused on economic and risk modeling. So taking some of the knowledge that we're gaining that we discover in goal one and two and incorporating that into better model development. And that helps us understand risk. It helps us understand the cost benefit analysis of using different mitigation strategies that reduce losses to extreme temperatures. And then we want to wrap that all up into a nationwide extension programming. And a good example of that is the upcoming Fruit School on March 11th, where it's a heat focused fruit school. It's in person in Wenatchee, but we're going to have learning hubs in different states. So in New York, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, we'll have learning hubs where growers in those regions can gather and discuss the knowledge that's being shared amongst themselves. So kind of this hybrid virtual learning hub in-person model, but really trying to get that nationwide extension programming in place for this project. So this is a USDA SCRI funded project. We have a wonderful group of people, and if you would like to learn more, we have a Spark website. And if you haven't registered for the Heat Fruit School on March 11th, you can use the QR code for the Spark website on the left and go to the Spark website, go to the events tab, and go down to the Fruit School, and there's a registration link in there. And then we also have a Sparked LinkedIn where we post highlights of our team and the activities that we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. I'm going to take over the screen here. Good morning or afternoon, everyone. I am Sonia Hall. I work at Washington State University as well. And I'm just going to very briefly share some of what we heard from growers. Maybe some of you actually responded to the survey that we put out last winter as part of the Spark project, looking to understand your perspectives on the impacts of heat and frost on apple and pear and the strategies that you use to mitigate these temperature-related losses, with a focus of trying to understand what what might be differences across the different production regions. So as I mentioned, we put out a survey last winter, an online survey, and the responses we got came from different places across the US, about a third from Oregon producers, about a quarter each from Washington State, and then a group of states in the Atlantic coast, and then the remaining 15 or 16% from Michigan. Please note the color coding here on this graph, because those are the colors that I'll use in showing you some of what we heard from growers in these different regions. So first, we asked about frequency of heat impacts, and sort of overall, you can see that for the most part, heat impacts are fairly frequent, anything between 2 and 5 years on average over the last decade, with Washington respondents showing higher proportion of those on a variety of different aspects of production. The exception, to a certain extent, was with harvest times, where Michigan and the Atlantic coast are seeing slightly higher frequency of impacts on harvest time, and color development in the fall that had pretty similar frequency across the board. We also asked about severity of those impacts, and again, Washington State respondents shared that they're seeing higher share of the crop affected by heat on average, on the order of 25%. There appeared to be changes in the frequency and severity of these impacts as well, with most respondents across all the different states expressing that they are seeing they have seen more frequent heat impacts in this last decade compared to before 2014, and that those impacts are also more severe. So what are growers doing about this? What are you all doing to address these impacts? We asked about a number of different management strategies in which were being currently used. And clearly across the board, with maybe the exception of the Atlantic coast states, spray-on protectants is a strategy that's being used commonly to address heat impacts. Washington State respondents did have other strategies that they highlighted as well, including the use of nets and overhead irrigation. We also asked about what strategies you'd be interested in if you had better information on their effectiveness. And it was interesting to see that spray-on protectants is definitely an area where there are still questions to be asked. And respondents from Michigan and Atlantic states in particular highlighted those. And there was also a significant interest across all the regions in heat-tolerant varieties to address these impacts. So just highlighting that Michigan respondents also were particularly interested in the use of netting to address heat impacts. So I won't go into the results that we got around cold, since we expect that there'll be a lot more conversation today around the heat impacts. But some of the conclusions that we, or some of the insights we took away from this survey is there is a need for the research that Lee just described that is being carried out as part of the SPARK project, and interest in that. There are also really interesting opportunities for cross-region learning with some of these differences that we highlight in these results between different states. And so hopefully today's conversation will contribute to that. And then there also is a clear interest in a variety of strategies to address heat impacts. So everything from the in-season respond to what you expect to happen in the short term, like the use of spray-on protectants, all the way to much longer term view and thinking of heat-tolerant varieties that will, of course, have a much longer horizon. So with that, I will wrap up. If questions come up, we will bring them into the conversation later on today. But for now, I will hand it over to Dan Weber to introduce our panelists. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Daniel Weber. I am a Penn State Extension educator, what used to be called an agent. I don't know how common that term is, but that's what I am. And I am going to be sort of the scrum leader for this here as we get started. I'm going to go around the room and I'm going to introduce our panelists, or I should say our participants in the virtual meetup program, my colleagues from all across the United States and from across Canada. They in turn will introduce their representatives from that region. Oh my gosh, all of a sudden I'm staring at myself. Thanks, Sonia. So anyway, let's see here. Yeah, there we go. That was a little bit disconcerting. Anyway, I'm going to introduce each of the panelists that are part of the virtual meetup program. They're going to in turn introduce our guests, who are growers and packers from throughout the United States and Canada. So I originally said I was going to work my way west to east, but it makes most sense for me to start off with our home fellow, Leighton Rice from Rice Fruit Company, just up the road from me. I'm going to ask that as you're introduced, the people who are part of the virtual meetup program, say who you are and what your role is. And then as you introduce your guest, yes, you have about 5 minutes to talk a little bit about what you've been observing. So Leighton, would you like to start off things by telling us who you are, what your role is, and what you've been seeing?
Sure. Leighton Rice, Rice Fruit Company. As Daniel said, we're 5 miles from their research station there in Biglerville, and we pack for around 40 growers. Most of them are local, and most of the volume comes from 6 or 7 big growers. And Daniel, if you could help me a little bit. So you just go right into, first of all, my role here, I'm the VP of quality. And so I get into a little bit of everything, but my main responsibilities are the storage operations and then the sorting and inventory management as well.
Yeah,
It's a tough job.
My apologies, Leighton. I was going to say that I will jump in and offer you a couple things if you'd like to address them, and I'll do the same for the other people. But have you noticed anything that in particular, as one of the largest packers in the area, if not the largest, any storage issues that you've noticed that you seem to be able to attribute to some environmental concerns? You also have a sister part of your business, R&L Orchards. Has there been any observable conditions in the field that you feel has impacted the quality of the fruit that you've seen this year?
Well, I think that our weather patterns have over the past 10 years have been similar to most places in that the extremes are more noticeable. So that would apply to heat, but also rainfall, periods of dry, and uh, sudden cold spells, at the wrong time. So we've had all of those things. It's like here, it any year could be a year where you're praying for more rain or less rain, depending on what time of the season. That said, I think the 2025 growing season was a little less extreme than others that we've had recently. So the thing that I'm always very focused on is fruit condition going into storage and then coming out of storage. And for the most part, I've been happy with what we've had to work with for the 2025 crop year. If there's anything that stands out to me this year and, things that I've learned, I kind of had to relearn this philosophy of treating fruit gently, and that applies to all varieties, but especially to earlier varieties, ones that are coming in very warm. And, you don't want to slam them down with cold temperatures, but I think people have this idea that there's this magic variety, or sorry, this magic recipe for each variety, and that if you just follow the recipe, then you're going to have great results. And if that's true, it's different every year. So I follow just a general strategy of handling fruit gently, and that means cooling it slowly, and in most cases, delaying CA initiation. And when I bring it down slowly. And so, yeah, I've had to relearn that again this year because I had some ripe galas that came in, and you always, out of fear, you think, well, I got to get these as cold as I can. And then it seems okay, and it seems okay, and it seems okay, and then in January it all falls apart and you don't know why. So I've had that issue this year, and then also lenticel breakdown just really kind of exploded on us very recently. And there's definitely a field component of that susceptibility based on conditioning, which, it's still a mystery to everyone. And I've gone down, all the AI kind of things, and that's helpful in a way, but still it doesn't narrow it down as much as what you would hope to approach the problem, in actionable ways when you're running a pack line. And specifically, we've had problems on Snapdragon and Galas. I'm always very worried about Fuji. I haven't really seen that yet this year, but so yeah, I would say some minor condition issues, and then lenticel breakdown.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. The other panelists here, I will introduce one after the other, and our grower guests, if you could answer similar questions. So I'm going to now head north a little ways and turn it over to Mario Sazo. Mario, would you like to introduce yourself and your guest?
Yeah, I would like to introduce Scott Henning. Scott is the Chief Operating Officer from Lake Ontario Fruit in Lake Ontario Fruit region.
Hi, everybody. Scott Henning, Lake Ontario Fruit. We are a packer, shipper, storage operator for slightly over 1 million bushels of apples. We work with about 15 growers in New York State. Our varieties are Gala, Honeycrisp, Sweet Tango, Fuji, Snapdragon, Pink Lady, Rave, and Envy. We're located in Albion, New York, and if you're not familiar, if you look at a map, look at New York State to the left side, to the right below Lake Ontario. That's us. We're in the Lake Plains. Our soils are very diverse. It seems sometimes like every acre is a different soil type. The temperature, climate is temperate. Annual precipitation is about 34 inches. So if you do the math, we get around 3 inches a month of rain. It's just good for growing apples. The region's moderated by Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario doesn't freeze. It's been a cold winter, but we've only had about 16% ice on the lake. So the lake stays reasonably warm through the winter, and that keeps us from dipping down super cold. And also in the spring, it takes a long time to warm up that body of water. So we have natural frost protection there. So it really moderates our climate. So some of the extremes that some of the other growing regions in the country receive, we just don't get that. It doesn't get as hot or as cold. Many orchards are not irrigated, but almost all of our orchards have tiling. So what that is that's drainage in the field, right? So there's perforated piping laid underground, and that helps to drain the water out of the soil. All right. Hail netting is not real common. There's a few orchards that have it. Frost protection is also not real common, but there's some frost protection going in. And our orchards are high density, a lot of new plantings going in, 1,000 plus trees per acre. So the 2025 growing season, it started off early on in April, very wet. So the average, I'm going to just run through this real quick, the different months. If you got a piece of paper there, and you can write this down. So April, the average rainfall in April is 2.8 inches. In 2025, we received 3.5 inches. Then we go to May, and we had an average is 2.8 again, and we had 5 inches. Followed by June, the average is 3.5, and we went to 6 inches of rain. So very wet, very cool. And then we broke off in July. Normally we get 3 inches of rain in July. We got 1.8, followed by an August average of 3.4, and we received 1.6. Then the month of September, normally 3 inches, we got 0.3 inches. So the fun thing with averages is that if you average up the average rainfall to what we received last year over that time frame, they're both around 18.5 inches, right? So even though the average, is very similar, like Leighton said, we have these extremes, right? So extreme amount of rain early on, breaking off into a very serious drought. So what ended up happening? We had very challenging pollination time period where it was just raining and cool through flower, and then went into fruit development and cell division were hindered. PGR effectiveness was limited because of this cool weather. So thinning wasn't good, and seed counts were very low. We had high disease pressure early on with scab, so we sprayed a lot of fungicides, and then it broke off into the drought that really hurt tree growth and fruit growth. The fruit already had fewer cells. Cell division wasn't great, fewer seeds. Then we broke off into a drought. So fruit size is very small this year. And that's been difficult as a packer trying to meet the demands of the market that needs trays and bags. Like I said, we don't have the weather extremes. Places like Yakima, we're temperate. The lake really helps us out a lot. One thing that we can't have those. We can have periods of a lot of rain, like I said. So, we put tiling. Some orchards have irrigation, not all, but we do the best we can. So the 2025 harvest was dry, was hot for Western New York standards, and the fruit was ripening quicker than prior years. Growers, we used a lot of PGRs, Retain, 1-MCP, Harvista to try to slow down maturity in the orchards. But we just struggled to keep up with that. The fruit size was small, so it was difficult on pickers. It slowed harvest down a bit, so that forced us behind a bit. It was a compromise between color and condition, and so we want to get good condition on fruit for long-term storage, but with that, right? So there's that color factor in there. So every day in harvest is a compromise. With these newer varieties, it seems like they all tend to be coming earlier in the harvest window. So yeah, a lot of PGR use. What do we do to combat heat for these earlier varieties? We're moving bins into the shade in the orchard. After we harvest, we're quickly delivering them to the storage to get them out of the heat. And then at the storage, we fill rooms, right? We fill, multiple rooms. We don't just slam one room with 1,000 bins. We'll fill 3 rooms at a time and try to spread out that field heat. As Leighton said, some of these new varieties, we're not slamming down the cold like we used to, receiving them in at 50 degrees or 40 degrees and stepping them down to their final temperature. 1-MCP has really helped out with that and slowing down ethylene immediately. So it's a different world. We're not really slamming down the cold like we used to. We're also using DCA, dynamic CA, for some varieties, and that's helping out to slow down maturity and ethylene production in the storage. Allows us to go longer. Coming out of storage, fruit quality has been a bit variable. The pressures are in line with our expectations, but we haven't had any issues with internal browning or softening yet. Fruit went in very hard this year. I think the drought helped us out with that a little bit, as well as small fruit. But we are seeing more skin cracking than we normally would, both on the shoulder of the fruit and in the stem bowl. So cracking is up. Bitter pit, leather blotch, and Honeycrisp. I don't know that it's more than usual. Some blocks there's a bit more, but I would say it's average. So nothing real terrible to report yet here. Again, it's only almost March, so I think it's still a little early yet. But all in all, small fruit.
Okay. Thank you for the report, Scott. Appreciate that. Yep. We'll now move a little bit west to Emily Lavely, Michigan State. If you could introduce your guest, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Lavely. I'm a tree fruit educator in West Central Michigan for Michigan State University Extension. And it's my privilege to introduce a couple of folks from Michigan to give their perspective. Jamie Kober, who's the enhancement director at Riveridge Produce Marketing, and Dan Zamitis, who's their farm manager.
Hello, everybody. I'll start off. So I'm Jamie. I have been with Riveridge for about 16 years. Spent time in the managing packing facility, and now currently working with growers in a lot of kind of compliance issues and quality, and that got me here today. So just want to talk about a few of the things that we've seen, and it's a lot of it's what Leighton and Scott have already talked about, because we're kind of in similar areas, especially for New York. Geographically, as Scott explained, we get those benefits from Lake Michigan. So we hope for temperate weather. This year has been a good one. We've got, some ice on the lake, so that's going to help us out in the spring, hopefully. But definitely having the same experiences with the weather. So I don't know, Sonia or who has them, but I did send a couple slides, because the picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So So for Riveridge markets about 60% of the apple, the fresh crop that's grown in Michigan. So we do that through 9 different packing houses. And then what's different about, I think, a lot of the East Coast, but even different from what Leighton and Scott deal with, is that we have a lot of decentralized storage. So we have a couple larger commercial storage operators, but really for the most part, a lot of growers and packers are operating their own storages kind of independently of each other, and they're all over the place. So that definitely leads to challenges with sharing information about what crops look like and characterizing that at harvest. So I want to get into that later, but this data that you're looking at, I pulled kind of as a composite of data that we get fed in from growers and packers while harvest is going on. I'm not going to claim it's statistically relevant or anything like that, because we don't get too carried away with it. But what I wanted to point out was, just pick 3 pretty basic things here: bruising, bitter pit, and then rot or decay on samples for fruit as it's being received. So that means as it's getting delivered to a packing shed. So this could be either right at harvest, or it could be any time throughout that pack season. And over the last few years, our incident of those, especially bitter pit and the rot or decay, have been pretty low. And it reinforces kind of what Scott and Leighton said. Over the last few years, we just really haven't seen any major storage issues. we've been pretty fortunate. That doesn't mean we don't have issues and there are other impacts, but this was one of the things, since the talk was about storage and what we're seeing coming out of it. I would agree right now, we haven't seen much, but like they said, it's only, or we're almost to March here, so we'll see what happens. If you go to the next slide, I think this is more the story that Scott had to tell. So the dotted line here is a 30-year just climate normal for the daily maximum temperatures in Sparta, Michigan, which is one of our main growing regions. You can see there's a lot of spikes that went above that for this last growing year of 2025. So we definitely experienced those high temperatures early and often. Again, to go with variability though, there's a couple of periods there where we fell pretty far below too. So for the most part, we ran ahead of normal on temperature, which probably we didn't see much effect in the orchard other than, moving the harvest along, like the survey results indicated, just changing the timeline on some of those harvest dates. If you go to the next slide, this is the graphic version of what Scott just explained. We had almost exactly the same precipitation pattern this last season. So you see the early part of the year, the blue line there, we were above average. So all those time periods that Scott was talking about, but then it was a slow crawl to the end of the harvest window after that. So especially you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 really significant flatline events in there where we just did not receive any precipitation at all through the growing season. So we ended up at quite a deficit. Like Scott said, that's what we've seen is a very small fruit size. A lot of our orchards, so this is a difference from New York, a lot of our orchards, the newer orchards at least, do have irrigation. But in my experience, which is basically anecdotal for the most part, but you just can't make up fruit size on irrigation. You can maintain maybe, but you don't gain it on irrigation. So we definitely saw that, and that influenced what we saw the rest of the crop come through. So small profile. Galas especially were one of the ones where that was more significant than others. So that kind of summarizes where we're at. But we still have issues. Like, I'm not saying we don't have issues. If you go ahead to the next slide. I think what we can focus on to do better storage-wise is, like I kind of mentioned before, our storages are decentralized. And so one of the challenges that we face is sometimes sharing information. So I think that we have in the past operated kind of in discrete units where we have growers who are growing, and then once they harvest, they deliver it to a storage, and then we have storage operators at store, and then we have marketers and packing facilities that then take it the next section and get that product down the road. What we need to see, and we're seeing it, but I think we need more, is communication between all three of those levels. We can't operate in these silos, and so in the growing area, it's important the storage operator knows if there's anything special, unique, different about that block, and especially use of post-harvest or pre-harvest materials like retain or 1-MCP in the field. If there's a history with that block that we know, it seems to be more susceptible to have some kind of browning if we hold it into February. Those things can be done. There's a lot of technology to help get that done, but for us, that's one of our challenges. Is just it happens at so many different places. It's getting that information sharing. And so this is one example too that Leighton talked about with lentil cell injury, and some of that's at the beginning is differentiating. What is the difference between bitter pit and lentil cell injury? And you can have two very different strategies for each of those disorders. And so with bitter pit, maybe you're going to try to get that fruit down the road first. With lentil cell injury, maybe you're looking at how that's going to hold up long term if it's spreading, things like that. So differentiation. The hard part for a lot of people is what's the difference. And how do you do that when we are relying on inspectors, whether it's in the field or in the packing facilities or storage operators? Sometimes this is not what they're specialized in, and so they're trained to look for defects and not necessarily categorize the defects into the right buckets sometimes. If you go to the next one, this one's a little harder to see, but this is a really good example of, in my opinion, of that. This is a detail that can get missed that growers need to communicate. Each of these stem bowls has decay in it. And what it looks like to me happened is that these maybe were picked early, or maybe we needed some training on the picker and the stems were pulled out of each of these. And so then that created an entry where you had decay start. And so this was something that if this had been communicated, maybe you market this stuff earlier before it has any problems, but this likely went into storage without saying anything about it. And if you've ever had to try to sort out fruit that has stem bowl decay, good luck. It's not fun. So those are kind of the bigger points. I think we could just benefit all from having a lot of increased communication for us, especially because we have the decentralized storage. Storage techniques in general, I think 1MCP has let us get away with a lot in the past. It's a really good product. And it can get you quite a ways down the road, but it can't always get you through the whole season. So I think it's important that we continue to consider how low oxygen, maybe if it's not even DCA, just low oxygen regimes are going to work, which doesn't necessarily mean below 1, but even, finding out where your sweet spots are for different varieties and things like that. And the other thing, or last point, I think that we're competing against a lot of different fruits out there, especially berries and things like that. We need to have a better product out there on the shelf every day. And our old quality standards are, does it have pressure? Does it have color? Okay, no internal defect. Okay, let's send it. It's good. And our consumers are getting way too choosy, and that they're paying decent money for some of this stuff. And so they want to have that experience as well. So I think that in the future, we need to talk about looking at, if we're using MCP, how is that affecting things like acid? And then how is that in turn affecting the flavor profile as we continue down that path? So those are my quick thoughts.
Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate that. Let's move north and head up into our friends in Canada and see what they have to say. Christy, Greg, McKelvey, would you like to introduce your guest?
Thanks, Danielle. And so, hello, everybody. My name is Christy Greg McGuffin. I'm the Apple IPM Specialist with the Ministry of Agriculture in Ontario, Canada. So it's my pleasure to introduce the Ontario panelist, Kirk Kemp, who joins us from Algoma Orchards. So welcome, Kirk. You want to unmute
There we
yourself?
go. Sorry, I was a little slow on unmuting myself. Thanks, Christy, for the introduction. Can you hear me? Okay, good. I'm not a pro at this kind of stuff, but I'm Kirk Kemp. Our family runs Algoma Orchards with my two boys. We're just east of Toronto, about an hour. We have about 30 or 40 growers, like some of the other fellows. The lion's share is coming from 7 or 8. We get fruit from almost Detroit to a little bit almost close to Montreal, along the north shore of Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, and some up on the south shore of Georgian Bay. So we have a vast group of growers that have a fair bit of different climate. We grow over half of the fruit that we handle ourselves. We handle a couple million boxes of packed fruit a year, sell to the retailers here in Ontario, and it spills into the other parts of regions of Canada when the other local suppliers run out. Kind of reiterate what a lot of the guys have been saying so far, that the climate has certainly been more up and down in the last 10 or 15 years. I can remember 2012 when we had summer hitting in the middle of March, and I had said a few years before, there's no chance in the world I'd ever buy a frost fan if I had to get out of the business. And 15 years later, we have almost 75% of our orchard covered with frost fans. And we found once you use them once, you kick yourself that you didn't have them before, because it doesn't take much of a savings in percentage of your crop to pay for a frost fan. But we do get quite a variability in the spring anymore. Normally, we don't get a winter like we've had. It's March in 2 days, and we got a foot of hard snow packed in the orchards all around us still here, and it's going to take a fair bit for that to go. And most years by the 1st of March is gone, and so then the soil warms up, and then when you get the little spikes in temperature, the roots want to get going. And so we've had a big fight in the last 10 or 15 years of spring frosts, but a lot of the growers in the province of Ontario have started buying frost fans or some type of equipment to mitigate the frost issue. Because if you can't get a good blossom started, it's pretty hard to pick a good crop. So that's the first place we start. Our growing seasons are similar to what the other guys mentioned. We see variabilities. Some years you get a really wet spring, other years you get quite dry. Then you can get a wet summer or a dry summer. And we haven't had the crazy temperatures in the winter. We had a bit of, I call a bit of a scare. Some of the guys here say I'm getting old and losing my nerve, but I'm sure we had some frost fans showing very close to -30 3 nights this year, but it was very, very short, full snow cover. So I'm not worried about the root system. I might be worried about some buds. We have a big chunk of buckets of water with cuttings in there, force budding right now. Reminds me I need to go take a look at them. They've been in there for a bit to see whether we've got much damage. I don't know what looking at them does you other than makes you feel good, but you're trying. But I normally feel like when we're good to -30, when we get to -30, sorry for you Americans, Christy, you're smarter than I am at that. Is that -10 Fahrenheit? Maybe more like -15 or 18 Fahrenheit for you guys. -17 C is the same as 0 Fahrenheit. So then it starts to go down. So I would say, -20 maybe Fahrenheit. I should have checked on my phone to give you an accurate, but it got pretty cool. But for a short period of time, so I'm not too concerned. The 2025 crop started out kind of normal bud break for the province, but we were fairly wet in the spring, and then there was a whole bunch of areas that were okay, -22. Christy just put up is -30s. And it got quite dry in some areas in the summer. We were very dry July and August till mid-September, and then we got some moisture. So our fall was good. Other areas were dry right through harvest. And so it was very challenging. For the area that I'm reporting from, it's hard to give a full-scale shot on what the growing season was like, because it's a 300-mile stretch that I'm reporting for. So there were some areas that were okay in the summer, dry in the fall, but everybody suffered with moisture this year in the area. So I see over time that, like I said about the frost protection, more people are putting more irrigation in. We're the same way. We buy farms that have reasonable access to water, but then it's a big project to get your irrigation system up. Frost fan's simple. You just pay a guy to erect a fan. There's nobody in our area or even in our province that you can hire a contractor to put in irrigation. It takes a lot of work, but after getting clipped, here we go. We've got on order to cover another 300 acres with water this year. We'll see if we can get it all done, but more and more people are I call it insurance. Traditionally, we get enough water, but we're buying insurance by buying that irrigation system to keep some water on these trees to take away the stress. I agree with somebody else that said already that it never replaces what comes up from the sky, but it certainly will help a lot. So we see ourselves doing a lot more of that. Overall, the crop came in a little smaller than average, but some areas the size was decent, other areas was very small. So overall, the inventory that we have here, we haven't got a big, huge buildup of bags. On Galas, we have a little bit of a buildup of bags, but the rest seem to be okay. Storage ability, it seems to be storing pretty well so far. But as Stephen said, we're only at the end of February here, so knock on wood, we've got quite a few months to go yet. And usually that's when the trouble starts, is late in the season. But we are doing what some of the other gentlemen have mentioned, that the old school, just slam them in there and get them as cold as you can, as fast as you can, is sort of going out the door on some of these newer varieties. And even on like our ambrosia is a big apple for us here in Ontario and Canada. And we're finding that we're trying to condition a little bit more because that apple can have some internal browning issues. And you never know when it's going to hit you. So far, maybe the researchers have a better idea, but we sometimes have farms that are right across the street, same soil conditions, same harvest time, and that one farm will have no browning and the other farm will have some browning even when they're sitting in the same room and they're open at the same time. So we're doing a little bit of conditioning on the ambrosia now, along with traditional Honeycrisp and some of these newer varieties that Rave and that we have. And we have a couple other varieties that are sort of localized to Canada that we are doing conditioning as well. And so I think it's helping, and one MCP has certainly helped us store the fruit a lot better, so we don't have a gun to our head quite as bad as to get that temperature down as fast as you possibly can. And we are playing around as well as what a lot of other storages are with cranking down the O2 levels down tighter. They make me really nervous. I usually tell my storage operator or manager that don't tell me that some of the rooms how low you got them because it scares me a little bit. But so far we're having good success with those. We've been able to store our ambrosia right into July and a little bit into August, and with that preconditioning and harvesting properly with honeys, we've been able to get into August when we needed to and not have a lot of problem. But like some of the other gentlemen mentioned, the last few years we haven't seen a terrible storage condition issue. So hopefully that continues, and we keep monitoring growers a lot. It's tricky, as pretty well everybody here that's been on the call so far have mentioned that they have multiple growers, and it gets harder to manage what those folks are going to do. But we try and communicate as much as we can about harvesting fruit when it should be harvested. And sometimes it's tricky. And ambrosia is a tricky apple for us. If it's warm in the fall, which it was, it doesn't want to color, and nobody likes to pick green apples, but there's no point in picking a red one that's not going to store, and the pressures aren't there. So it's tricky. We've continued to work with growers to trying to communicate with them on their harvest dates and make sure that we get them stored in the right rooms at the right time. But overall, we feel like it's one of those things that we're going to have to continue to be more flexible in what we're doing on the farms because of the temperature changes, and try and assist Mother Nature with some mitigation of the climate. And there's not much hail netting in Ontario, and people sometimes if you do the math, it works, but just hard for guys to dig in their pocket, ourselves included, to spend the extra money to put that hail netting up. I know the hail netting sometimes will certainly help with some of the hot weather. Where we are, because we're east of Toronto, we don't get the really, really hot weather normally. So, some years we have to put a little bit of a surround type product on the trees to stop some sunburn on the odd variety, but we don't use much of that at all. We're pretty fortunate. Some of the folks that are closer to the Detroit, Windsor area, they have to do a little bit more, but we're pretty lucky here. We're a little cooler. On the other side, we don't get the size and the yield that the hotter areas do, but it does help us for sunburn conditions. So that's pretty well all I've got to offer, and try not to repeat too much of what was already said.
Thank you, Kirk. I appreciate that. And don't worry about using Celsius there. Maybe sometime in the next 250 years, us Americans will have adopted that. Let's go ahead and head west, hop on I-94, I-90, and get out to Bernadita's territory. Bernadita, you're going to be covering Washington and Oregon with your two guests. Would you care to introduce yourself and them, please?
Yes, thank you, Dan. Hi, everybody. I'm Bernardita Salato. I'm a Tree Fruit Extension Specialist here in Washington State. And I will start with Chad Wimmers. He's from Mount Adams Orchard, and he will be talking about the conditions for Mid-Columbia region, Washington, and Oregon. Welcome, Chad.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you. I'm Chad Wimmers, Director of Product for Mount Adams Fruits, about 60 miles east of Portland. We pack about 4 million boxes of fruit a year, mostly pears and cherries, but to a lesser extent, apples as well. Just a quick comment about me. I've been in the business on this side for about 20 years, but I grew up on a farm, so I think I'm typically biased to the grower side of things. But over the last 20 years, like I said, I've been on this side, and it's one of those things that we can't make it better from the packing house side. As much as we want to and try, we can't. So we try to certainly work with you. And some of these comments from the other panelists bring up some comments like crop protectants and crop removal of those protectants. It can be really difficult. So we don't want to handcuff growers, but on the other end, when it comes in here, it creates difficulties. Maybe I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I'll try to keep to the program and keep it short. 2025, this year, was maybe less of the extremes like some of the others reported, but I think we're dealing with some challenges here in the Northwest that others aren't. It was a record crop. We have a lot of pears to get through. Sunburn was certainly a story. We asked growers to leave as much out in the field as they could, but still the sunburn damage was a lot higher than we've faced in the past. We've had higher temps, but so much of that is just stage of when it shows up and when we see that damage. But certainly we've had a lot to deal with on the sunburn side. Some internal issues, and a lot of these things are not direct issues of heat, but it could be non-direct. Psylla control, pear psylla control has been really difficult in our neighborhood. I've heard a lot of stories up in Washington, and the packing house is in Washington, but really it's right in the mid-Columbia. So Hood River is the main growing district in Oregon there. So in the recent past, though, I'm going to say 15 years, boy, the extremes have been all over the place. Growing up on the farm, I don't remember people talking about hail, but hail has been a common theme for the last, I would say 7 of the last 10 years. That's something we've really had to watch out for. Certainly physiological issues, cork, shorter growing seasons. So getting the sizing that we're used to can certainly be a challenge. Scald, change in spray conditions, things like that. Every year is different, I guess, is my point. And this year, it looks like it's going to be no different than others. We saw people spraying dormant on the 5th of February, maybe sooner, but that's really early. You look at the hills around here, the mountains may look pretty, but the snowpack is really low. So are we going to deal with irrigation issues and drought conditions? Very different. We don't get a lot of summer rain to help us out, so we're very dependent on our irrigation systems. So maybe I think more about some of these non-direct type of situations, but worker protection and new laws that we have to recognize, and certainly safety first. But when we start to look at those things of extreme working conditions for harvest, we have to bring in supplemental income, and that can be very expensive too. So I'll keep it there. But it sounds like in the Northwest a very different experience from what folks saw on the East Coast and in the Midwest.
Thank you, Chad. I guess we agree that we have this diversity and differences condition. That's what brings this webinar, I think, the value, so we can share on those. So I'm gonna move on to introduce Aaron Clark. He's from Price Cold Storage and Packing. And thank you not only for being a panelist today, but also for jumping in on a very short notice. Thank you, Clark.
Yeah. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, my name is Aaron Clark. I'm the Vice President of Price Cold Storage. I oversee the farming operations. We're a vertically integrated grower packer. We farm about 3,500 acres of our own and oversee grower acreage of maybe 1,500 to 2,000. We're about a 4.5 million box packer. Most of that is apples. We do grow 20,000 bins or so of organic pears. Those get packed. We don't pack those. Those get packed at Matson. So, in the West, the striking thing you notice when you go east or when the East guys come west is that we spend a whole lot more of our time and money moderating our environment because we don't ever have enough rainfall and we can have severe winters. There's so much frost control in the industry anymore. I mean, it's not that in the spring, it's not that we couldn't possibly lose a crop, but the last major one I remember, and I've done this 45 years, long time, the last major one I remember was 85. And so, we get nicked up here and there in the spring, but everybody's got plenty of fans, and right now we don't have lots of water. Last year was a bad water year. Some of the junior districts only received about 35% of their allocation. It's not looking a whole lot better than that this year. The majority of what we farm has senior water rights, either in South Columbia or in the kind of Wapato, Buena, Parker Heights area. So we've got mostly enough water most places. So the thing that we deal with more is just sunburn issues. And our crop this year, you gave that poll earlier. I didn't answer the middle question. The reason is because bitter pit wasn't on there. If we didn't have bitter pit, I mean, our pack outs would be phenomenal. We've got just bitter pit in almost every variety this year, and we're all asking ourselves why, and I don't really know. We spend a lot of time working with soil fertility, and we spend a lot of time knowing what the water is we're putting on the crops and making sure that we have adequate but not excessive nutrition, and we do a whole lot of things. But this year, for whatever reason, we've just got a lot of bitter pit. But to be fair, if I didn't pack Honeycrisp, I'd have 80% less bitter pit. So, maybe just get rid of Honeycrisp and we'll be better. So we're always working on sunburn things, and there's a lot of tools, and some of them are okay. But in my opinion, none of them are real great. Cooling is certainly the best thing to do, but it's so easy to overdo that and put excess water on the plants. We've done a lot of work with covers, and I can make enough money putting the covers up to pay for the cover after about 3 years. But aside from a flyer once in a while where we get a lot that responds to it, we don't get any consistency out of that. It might be really great one year, and then the next year it just doesn't make any difference. Spray on protectants. I'm hoping there'll be more work on that because again, not super consistent. You can make non-colored varieties like Granny's or something, just white with kaolin if you want to, but then you have to deal with it at the packing house. And on the colored varieties, I like to tell the team that, we're going to do them. We use the tools we have, but I think often we're just making really ugly culls, prettier culls, spraying all this stuff, and it costs a lot of money. And I think we're all dealing in the apple thing, especially, and the pear thing last year was long, so pear pricing's been good, but these apple prices have been gross the last 3 years, and so there just isn't extra money to put out there unless you really are going to see some return, some ROI there. So Budgets are tight, but yet we still have to grow great crops. And you know, when I look back at if I look like the last couple of years, 2, 3 years, I was interviewed on about a book professor was writing here not long ago about a component of it was climate change, of whether or not I thought we had climate change or whether we just had diverse weather. And that's a great question. And I don't know. I've done this a long time, and I don't know if have our last couple of summers been hotter. I don't know. I don't think last summer was hotter. It was hot at a bad time. It was hot right at the initiation of Honeycrisp harvest, and that does a couple of things. You know, we don't need apples to be blood red, but we need to have decent color. But it delayed color, and then that in some places delays a little bit of maturity, and that's never good. You have to pick crops with stellar maturity, and we have to span 12 months. So it's super important we get our late rooms full early. You know, a few years ago, we had the heat dome. You know, that was really tough, but you know, honestly, our crop wasn't a bad storing crop that year either. So, you know, are we having more adverse weather? I don't know. We've always had adverse weather, and we've got some now. We were expecting to have better snowpack, but it is what it is, and it doesn't look like now it's going to be a whole lot different than last year. But part of the pack out thing, we're oversupplied on apples, I think, nationwide and certainly here in Washington. And the ramifications of that are that it does affect pack out. You have to have velocity to make certain the crop is moving well so that you stay on top of the condition as you're shipping 12 months. You can't take chances on having rejections. You can't take chances on having inventory get old because you had a rejection and your velocity slows down. So that in turn really requires us to put a pretty tight grade out there. And so, you know, we have, you know, AI sorting platforms anymore, and they're just too good. Honestly, they're just too good. They can sort out anything. So it's a very, very, very hyper clean box we're shipping. And we've got good velocity and staying ahead of condition, and all that's going well. But that, you know, at some point in some varieties and some stages, that speaks into pack out as well. So if I didn't have bitter pit this year, and to some extent last year, I think I'd be very happy right now. But our condition is good, our pressure is good. We don't, you know, you always have a little bit of cracking, you always have a little bit of decay. Our organic stuff, which is about 35% of what we're doing, I think honestly is better than the conventional. And some low oxygen stuff has been talked about here today. You know, we're exploring rolling that out on the totality of our storages. I think that's something to look at. That our organic stuff is, quite frankly, is better than some of the conventional blocks, but it's only a third of what we do. So would it be holistically better if it was more? I'm not sure, but you have deficit nutrition most of the time on organics, and that may be a player. But anyway, yeah, that's about it. I mean, spring, summer, fall, or spring, summer, or spring, winter, I guess I've seen it 20 below Fahrenheit here without extensive tree damage. So we don't worry about winter and spring too much. Summer heat, and some of that's variety driven. You know, if it hits you at the right time, if you're right at the initiation of gala harvest or honey harvest or something like that, can be problematic. But, you know, we're working on bitter pit right now and looking for better alternatives for sunburn protection when we can get them.
Hey, thank you, Aaron. Appreciate that. Let's now go up north to our last guest, and I will turn this now over to Lindsay King up in British Columbia. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thanks, Daniel. My name's Lindsay King, and I'm the tree fruit specialist for the British Columbia Ministry of Agriculture and Food. And I am very pleased to introduce David Machial. He is a grower manager at Fairview Orchards in Oliver, British Columbia. Take it away, David.
Yeah, good day, everyone. I'm a third generation apple grower here in BC. My family's been growing apples here since 1964 when my grandparents brought over my dad and uncles from Portugal. You know, they were just looking for a better life and they found one here in Oliver. In 1992, my dad and my uncle Rick, they weren't pleased with their current packers. So they took a chance and they decided to start their own packing house. And fortunately, they were successful. And today we're packing fruit for about 30 growers up and down the valley. Now, one thing about the BC industry, we're small. Our land is ridiculously expensive, so we can't afford to be big. Average farm size is about 10 to 15 acres. And one thing we've seen a lot in our industry in the last couple of years, especially since BC tree fruits has gone away, is we've had a lot of fragmentation. There's a lot of small packers like ourselves. So it makes sharing information more challenging, both in terms of what's going on up and down the valley and just in terms of sharing expertise. One thing about BC, I kind of look at us as a two variety industry now. Gala and ambrosia are very important. Certainly we can grow anything that Washington State can grow. Our climates are very similar. But really Gala and ambrosia, those are the two varieties we rely on. And ambrosia, I kind of see it as BC's flagship apple. So as far as what we saw as a packer this year, a lot more calls. You know, I don't have the exact numbers, but I would say we were probably throwing away an additional 80 pounds of apples per bin versus a normal year. And what we've been throwing away, well, if it's Gala, there's more stem cracking. Ambrosia, we've seen more cracking on the calyx end. Both varieties, I don't know why, but they're just breaking down faster in storage. They're not holding their pressures, and eventually that leads to rot. The other thing we noticed is the apples just seem to be more susceptible to bruising this year. You know, you always get that little bit of like scuffing or rubbing, and normally that cures out in storage. But this year it isn't, it's staying. So you're having to throw away more fruit. And then the big boogeyman in BC, it's soft-skulled on ambrosia. So Sonia, can you just show picture number 1? So you see those 5 apples, you see those brown patches, they look terrible. But I can tell you when that fruit got picked, it looked beautiful. So my understanding of it is we're getting damage at a cellular level in the orchard. It's caused by stress in the environment. When you're a grower, you're picking your fruit, you're really happy, it looks great. But then after 3+ weeks in storage, it starts to develop those brown patches, and suddenly apples that should be worth good money are worthless. And Sonia, can you just show the second picture as well? And what's interesting about it is, as you can see, it's at the skin level. I peel back that skin, the flesh underneath is fine. You know, after maybe 4 weeks, after 4+ weeks in storage, that flesh will start to break down, but it's really just an issue at the skin level. So that's been a big struggle for us this year. Ambrosia, it is susceptible to it, but this year we're seeing more soft skull. So the big question is, you know, why are we seeing more? And I think it kind of comes down to 2 factors. This year apples were really big in British Columbia. I would say 2 box sizes larger. For example, with Gala, we encourage our growers to target sizes 88s and 80s. That seems to be the money spot. But this year, growers that usually do that, they were peaking on size 64s. And with ambrosia, the apples were even larger. A lot of growers were peaking on size 64. They were peaking on size 56. We even had a couple of guys, I swear half their fruit was size 48. And you know, I don't have a good explanation for it. It's tied to the weather. But the thing about big apples, and I think we all kind of know that, they break down faster. You start having more of those issues that I talked about, you know, the cracking. They just don't hold up in storage the same way. And then the other factor, it was just hot. And It wasn't extremely hot in 2025. Like in 2024, I remember around the end of July, we probably had about 2 weeks where the highs were above 35 degrees Celsius. We didn't have that, but September was hotter than normal. So I would say every day, with the exception of the last 10 days, our highs were 30 degrees Celsius and our lows were maybe between 15 and 20 degrees Celsius. So not great weather for developing apples close to harvest. So it's not that we had extreme temperatures, but we had hot temperatures at the wrong time. And I remember looking at my ambrosia. I was pretty depressed 2 weeks before harvest. I could see the sun skull developing, and I'm just thinking I'm going to lose 30% of my apple crop. I'm going to throw it to the ground. And then I thought a miracle happened. The last 5 days before harvest, it rained. The weather cooled down. The really badly damaged apples, those were bad. I threw those to the ground. But anywhere where I thought I was seeing just the beginning of heat damage, suddenly those apples colored over and they looked great. But unfortunately, it went into storage and the damage was there at an internal level. I couldn't see it when I was picking my fruit, but I certainly saw the damage that I showed you in that photo 4 weeks after that fruit sat in storage. So yeah, it's been a challenging year up here in BC. What to do going forward, that's the question that's been keeping me up at night every winter, all winter long. As a packer, we're trying to condition our fruit. We're getting the MCP on right away. But if the fruit comes to you as a packer already with issues, you're really limited as to what you can do. So where I'm kind of scratching my head is what can I do in my orchard differently going forward if hot Septembers become the new normal? Here we have irrigation, so I can control my water. I certainly wasn't stressing my trees in terms of water. As far as sunburn protection, I'm putting on things like, we use Caltrac. It's calcium, but it leaves that white residue that blocks out the sun. Well, in the past that's helped, but it didn't seem to help this year. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't have any great answers or solutions. There's things I'm kind of thinking about, like Harvista is kind of a new product to BC. I know you're using it in other places, so I'm thinking, well, maybe I can use Harvista to shift my harvest window into a cooler period. Maybe more early October versus late September for picking my ambrosia. That's something I'm kind of flirting with, and I'm obviously exploring netting and things like some type of overhead irrigation or a misting system. But I'm concerned about netting because, as you all know, apples have to be red to make money. And with ambrosia, it's a bicolor apple, and I call it's really a yellow apple that you can make red. But if it has any shading at all, like I've seen an apple where you have that one leaf and you see the silhouette of that leaf surrounded by red. So it's tough because we're trying to make this bicolor apple look more like a red delicious. And how do you do that in a warming climate? But I'm hoping this group, like I'm optimistic to see this group, and there's a lot of incredibly intelligent people here, and let's find a solution. So yeah, a bit bleak. So I do want to end on a positive note. The fruit tasted really good this year. Sugars were high, and I know that because we had people who were buying our apples in the store. They would take the time to call us up and just be like, wow, I just had an ambrosia. I think it was the best apple I ever had. So that's reassuring because those people are going to be coming back next year to buy apples. But from a grower's perspective, they're going to be disappointed because the returns are going to be low because we just have to throw away so much extra fruit. So yeah, that was the situation in BC this year. Thanks.
All right. Thanks to everybody who contributed. We'd now like to turn this over to the audience here. I put a note into the chat there that, if you have questions, you can put it there. But I'd prefer, if you've got a question, just go ahead and ask it. So I see Leighton, you put something in chat. Would you like to elaborate a little bit on that to kick us off here?
Yeah, I've seen similar problems, not something that looked so obviously like soft scald proper, but something that would be sort of in the range of storage disorders that could be connected with CO2, which I would also include leather blotch and something that looks like soggy breakdown. So that was a problem we saw obviously in Honeycrisp, but to some extent in Ambrosia. And we're heavy users of the bin sachets, which, you know, it gives it this kind of mega dose of 1 MCP right off the truck. And so that can be very useful, but you have to be careful with it as well. And part of that is, you know, leaving the doors open for a long time and bringing the fruit down slowly. But when I did all those things, then yeah, like the problem went away. So, and we're talking target temps 40 degrees, 38 degrees, you know, but 40 degrees probably for the first few weeks. And then, you know, not closing doors at least 2 weeks after you load the last bin in the room. Yeah. But I've come to see Ambrosia as a pretty easy apple to store.
Okay, is anybody else on the call here want to address that question as well while we're on the subject? You can feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand. I believe Sonia's kind of tracking that. Is that correct? For some reason, my participants list is not showing up on my end. So I hope you're tracking that.
Yes, I can track that.
Okay. All right. So if you do have a question, just raise your hand or just start speaking here. And just unmute yourself and we'll go from there. But I'd like to follow up a little bit on what Leighton said and ask the packers here. Several times during this conversation, the idea of changing your conditioning as you're bringing the fruit in from the field, you're altering some preconditioning situations here by not 3 or 4 people said, don't slam it into the cold. I was kind of curious if you would mind sharing some of the things that you found effective for particular varieties. You know, is there a particular preconditioning regime that you found is effective for, say, Gala, Fuji, Honeycrisp, and so forth? Anybody want to volunteer? And this is open also to the audience if there's a packer on the audience that would like to chime in as well. Okay, that went nowhere. A few of you mentioned.
Daniel, I can throw in there one thing, comment on that. I think that the regimes a lot of us follow on Honeycrisp are pretty much established, you know, looking at, you know, 50 degrees for a week, 10 days, something like that, to bring that, to condition them. But I think field heat in general is becoming a bigger concern. That goes kind of hand in hand with the increased temperature that we're seeing. But one of the things we've noticed is it's that extreme too. So later, like if you're looking at maybe like a third pick of Honeycrisp, so you're getting later in the season, so your temperatures are getting high, but more importantly, they're getting lower. Just even that differential that I believe that you can see some injury in the field. And so sometimes it's important to even not, the storage part's obviously important, but it's even important to look at those weather trends that are maybe predicted and forecasted to come up there and make some decisions about how you're going to manage harvest. Because I believe that I've seen killing injury that has taken place in the field and not in storage.
Has anybody else observed that? What about some of these other newer varieties that are out there? You know, I know you folks in Washington have Cosmic Crisp and this new apple honeys. I guess that's how you're pronouncing it, Cosmic Crisp honey hybrid. Actually, I was impressed with that, Bernadita, and we had one the other day. You unmuted yourself, so I thought maybe you want to chime in on that.
Yeah, I don't want to be too biased, but actually Cosmic Crisp is a very good apple to store, so it handles very well storability. But we did see this year, as many of you have shared, an increase on the cracking and splits. So I wonder if anyone has anything to share in relation to that. Do you see that related to the variety, or mostly that spring, cooler spring, and then sudden heat. Does anyone have some experience with that?
Can you say that one more time? Experience with what specifically?
With the, I don't know, Aaron, if you've noticed the same, but in some of the orchards here in Washington, we found an increased level of crackings, which was also mentioned by Scott, cracking or splits in the apples. Did you see the same? And do you attribute that to anything in particular?
Yeah, so I'd say a couple of things about cracking and cosmic this year. One of it's there's still a lot of juvenility in some orchards coming on. It's greater there. In the field, when you're making harvest decisions, you have three indices. You have pressure, starches, and sugars. There is a starch component that has been touted with regard to proper times to pick cosmic. And I don't remember off the top of my head what it is right now, but a
2.5.
Okay, 2.5. Okay. So in any given year, one of those indices doesn't work. And we have a few blocks this year that they just didn't convert starches. I knew they were ready. I should have just picked them. And we didn't, and we waited a while. Definitely more cracking in those blocks. I should have picked them at a 1 starch. They'd have been just fine. They ate good off the tree right then. So you can't, this is a problem with having firm, hard maturity levels for harvest or release. You have to have something, but in any given year, one of those could be askew. And in my opinion, this year's cracking was pretty well related to juvenility, and then there was cosmic blocks that just didn't convert starch, even though they were mature. And you get late, you're going to get some cracking on them. And aside from that, when I looked at my more mature blocks, we didn't very little cracking. Yeah.
Anybody else want to comment on the cracking issue?
And then, Dan, we have a question in the chat.
Yes, I see that. Dennis, did you want to ask that question directly, or should we just read that? You can unmute yourself if you wish. I hope I said your name right. Okay, so
I could add on the cracking thing.
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead, Leighton, please.
So where we are, we're kind of the southernmost area of major production on the East Coast. And so we get a lot of heat units compared to even Hudson Valley, but definitely Western New York. And Fuji, something I've seen a lot, and I think it's come up more recently. I mean, you always have stem cracks related to rain events and stuff around harvest on galas and Honeycrisp, especially those two. But Fuji, we've seen in recent years it's like micro cracks that are not connected to the stem, but they're in a concentric pattern around the stem, and to me it looks like heat stress. So we get these, Indian fall where it's like 85 degrees for a week in October, and a lot of the growers have parked their sprayers at that point, and the apples are just sitting there baking, and they think of Fuji as being end of October, or at least when they're done with the other things they have to pick. So, but we have to adjust to this new normal where maybe you're picking Fuji's like the second week of October, and maybe you're picking Granny's, around the same time or even a bit before that. Otherwise, yeah, you're going to have this fruit that it looks fine in the bin, but it's got these like micro hairline cracks, you might say, that open up in storage and turn brown. And all of a sudden your pack outs just dropped 40%. and the grower's like, what the heck is going on? Because the fruit looked fine when they delivered it. So we're seeing a lot of that kind of thing, especially in Fuji.
I'll make
Scott.
I'll make one comment on that as well, just to follow up with Leighton there. It seems like periods, like I said, we had a really wet spring followed by a very serious drought. I think there's it's like times where you have like uneven turgor pressure in the tree, right? And the fruit doesn't grow at a nice smooth rate, right? So if places where down by the lake where it doesn't get real hot, fruit grows kind of slow, tends to be a higher soil moisture levels. Seems like we get less cracking than inland sites where we have periods of rapid cell expansion. Just wanted to throw that in there.
Okay.
Also, I'll add one thing as well. So to kind of echo what Leighton said, I'm Patrick Dorsing. I farm in Washington State, and what I saw this year for cracking issues, specifically on Honeycrisp, was in our warmer blocks or kind of south facing warmer districts. I found more severe cracking in those blocks, especially, and so we had real untimely heat this year where we were picking our first pick of Honeycrisp and we got into the mid 90s and just pretty instantly within a week or two we were seeing cracks, just shoulder cracks that would sometimes split all the way down the apple, and it was more severe in the tops of the tree as well as, like I said, in the blocks that maybe were a little weaker, had a little bit less canopy, that they got that direct sunlight, and then it seemed like the blocks that we had on more north facing slopes that we didn't see the cracking issue nearly as bad.
Anybody else want to address cracking issues? Again, you can unmute yourself if you wish to make a comment to contribute to the discussion. If not, I just realized I owe an apology to my colleagues, Emily and Lindsay. You're the ones that are supposed to be monitoring the chat and interacting with those folks. So there's a couple questions that came in. Do you want to handle those?
You're doing a great job, Dan. I think you should keep going.
No. You just spoke, so you unmuted yourself. Would you like to ask Devansh's question for everybody?
Yes. Okay. Given the unusual frost and heat events we've seen recently, have you observed any cultivar performance that surprised you by over or under performance relative to expectations under stress conditions? And that's in the chat if anyone wants to give it a read as well.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question if you're considering diversifying what you're growing. Has anybody got any recommendations for anything that surprised you this year?
Yeah, I was surprised that Honeycrisp still got plenty of fruit size in the severe drought. We still have oversized Honeycrisp. That apple just gets big.
Scott, but you also mentioned that you had a low crop this year.
Honeycrisp had a very fair crop. Yep,
Okay.
it was a good crop. Yep. In fact, we had a good crop. A lot of apples set without seeds. Yeah, they just didn't thin. It's like we had so much rain. It was so cool that the trees just didn't get stressed out, so they didn't thin. I think the PGRs just didn't work that well with the weather.
I talked to a grower recently who is concerned not about this crop. He's concerned about next year's crop, and that the heat and the stress during bud formation for next year's crop may potentially be an issue. So not an over-under thing we can tie to this crop, but something else that I know is on the minds of growers out there, or at least one that I talked to.
Mr. Dorsing, I think I'm pronouncing your name right. I saw you popped your camera on there. Did you want to add to that discussion as well?
No, I think they covered it. I had something, but they got it.
Oh, okay. Great. Anybody else want to add to that before we move on to the next question. Emily, you want to take the next one from Bob?
Sure. Yeah, there's a question for Chad specifically, and then if others want to chime in, feel free. The question is, what's the impact of hot summers and harvest on breaking color and Bartlett pears?
Yeah, hey Bob, thanks for the question. With hot summers, I think more about sizing and sizing issues. When we measure during those time periods, we can certainly see a slow growth during those hot spells that get above 95, certainly for a longer period of time. When I think about breaking color or shorter growing seasons, we saw a really short growing season the other, I think it was 3 years ago. That accumulated heat on the front end right after bloom, I think it's up to 28 days after bloom, really affect that growing season. I think we all know with the cannery situation, and I won't get into that, but we need bigger pears to be successful. And so that tendency is to delay harvest to get bigger size. Well, that's just going to give you trouble in storage. So you need to pay really close attention to your pressures. But yeah, there's going to be that tendency, but the effort needs to be on the front end with crop management, not in delayed harvest. That's just going to get you in trouble. Just to be clear, a lot of these practices on the apple side about delaying the room treatment, bringing down, that's quite opposite in pears. We want things cold fast, as quick as we can, and get them under controlled atmosphere quickly. So I hope that answers your question, Bob. That's how we look at it down here. I'm sure you have more to add to that as well.
Chad, does anyone else have any other comments about pear? Chad, I think you're the expert in the room when it comes to pears. So thank you for responding to that.
Chad?
Mark, go ahead.
Well, Chad, do you remember California ever having a problem with that? Because their heat temperature is so much higher than ours. And I always thought that they had pretty clean
pears. A problem
pears.
with color break specifically? Yes. I don't know a lot about the California crop. I just, we are quite familiar with, how long they can keep their product. And it certainly affects our efforts in movement. And, we're always trying to convince people to move up to the Northwest when we have product ready. I think we just have to really be careful as an industry, and I'm going to give a shameless plug against using MCP and Bartlett's, because I'm convinced that we can't use that as a safe tool to protect the eating experience. So you have to do everything right. Growing Bartlett's to deliver a good eating experience. So again, keeping your harvest pressures appropriate, getting things cold quickly, and marketing them in the right window is really going to deliver success. Sorry, Bob's got a color break as we store the Bartlett's longer. Sure. Yeah, and one of those answers, if you have a big crop, is to extend the marketing season, not move more at a lower price. So we are being asked to do things better. I think the best tools that we found is harvesting them in the right price, getting them cold fast, and under the right controlled atmosphere conditions. We've had really pretty good success. There are other problems that rear their heads, like dehydration when you try to store things longer. But yeah, at least in the Mid-Columbia, I think we've seen a lot of success with that. I don't want to speak about what I don't know down in California or up in Wenatchee, but yeah, I think we've had good success here locally.
Playing around with MCP or Harvesta or Retain in the orchard setting?
There have been, I would say, with mixed results. Going back to the earlier question, I think Jamie answered that well, at least on the apple side. Not a requirement, but it certainly gives you more options when you do, whether that's storage, packing and selling, or harvest window. It can be an effective tool. I would say mixed results on the pear side to try to overcome the cost and effort. That's challenging. So I wouldn't give a clear, this is the answer, this is the tool that we have to use. I'm a little skeptical on the Bartlett side.
Okay, thank you.
With that being said, I have seen successful efforts with that in conjunction with the other tools that we have in place. So it certainly doesn't hurt. I'll say that.
Okay, any other questions from our audience here? We are a little bit, I believe, over time. But even so, if there aren't any others from the audience, I have a question myself, but I would like to defer to any of the public that's here first. It's your last chance here. Okay, so here's a general question for the Packers, because it's a subject I don't know a whole lot about. But I've been reading more about protectants being used, and it was brought up a couple times here, like hail and clays and so forth. From the packing side, are there any thoughts or recommendations about what people should or should not use, just from the cleanup side? I mean, if it takes a lot of extra effort to get rid of surround, what are your recommendations or thoughts on that? So that's tossed out to those folks in packing here, if you want to make some comments.
Well, I just make the comment that, I mean, the rest of them, the waxes and that kind of thing, don't leave any residue in the dump tanks. Kaolin gets in the stem bowls. We can handle it. We can make it work. It's just not an ideal thing. And back to my earlier point, I think if we're gonna use sunburn protectants, we start early and stay with one the whole season. And I think that's true for whatever cooling you're doing. Even if you're cooling with water, you don't want to start and stop, start and stay with it. So, whatever, it's pretty grower specific. I have people that work for me that just love kaolin and that's what they want to do, and I let them. But there's waxes that can be used too, and they'll do something. I just don't think they're consistently very good, any of them. Yeah.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions from the audience or any other comments from any of the Packers, Sonia, I turn it over to you then, I believe.
I would just put a plug for late season fungicides, especially for the East Coast guys. I don't know what people prefer to use or what the best chemistry is now, but if the PHI is, 2 days, then put it on 2 days before you pick it. Because once it's in the bin, there's not really a good way to control rot. And I think a lot of the growers would be surprised when we go to pack the fruit, what it looks like.
That is an excellent point, Leighton. At the winter fruit schools, Carrie Peter brought up storage scab, that the weather conditions have been enough that people who haven't put on a fungicide later in the season don't realize that there's another generation of Venturia that have started to affect the surface of the fruit. She's run into it a couple times this year, and so she made the exact same point at our fruit schools, that's not something to discount. It was a late season fungicide application.
For a scab? Really? Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm thinking rots, but not scab.
Yeah, she had an interesting picture of, I think it was Granny Smith, but I could be wrong about that, where you very clearly had what looked like little puncture holes all over the surface of the skin. And when they isolated what it was, it turned out to be plain old scab. So the conditions were right this year to have kind of a fourth generation of it, apparently, and you didn't notice it, obviously. And so a lot of growers had already stopped spraying. And then when it was pulled out of scab, yeah, sure enough, that's what she found it is. So anyway, just a little tip from Carrie there.
Yeah, she called it storage scab, and it's something that they haven't seen in like 100 years. but now it's exploded again.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah. Well,
Anybody else seeing that? I'm curious. Jamie, I saw that you unmuted. I don't know if
No,
you had.
not with the scab specifically itself, but yes, I think that's one thing I know, at least in this area, packing sheds do not do a very good job of quantifying how many apples are lost to decay or things that fungicides could prevent. And so I think that growers then don't have the full story, and their perception is that the value is not as significant as it is in a fungicide application, whether it's definitely in the orchard or even in the storage. I think it's an area that gets overlooked, and as I understand it, at that point of the year, you put all these inputs in, and it's the very last thing, and it's like, do I want to spend one more application of whatever at whatever point it is? But a lot of these things, you recover one unit from a bin, and it paid for it, and it just doesn't take very much. So I just wholeheartedly wanted to support the whole idea of late season fungicides, whether it's in the orchard or storage.
Yeah, since this has come up, I believe that Carrie's going to start including that in our seasonal updates for fungicide sprays, and make a point of illustrating that later in the season. Yeah, we had a very, very wet fall, which also impacted things here in Pennsylvania. There were a few weeks in September and October where we got 2 to 3 inches of rain, kind of in big batches. So that she thinks that contributed to it as well. Okay, well, we ended on kind of a surprise there. It wasn't planned in any way, but I'm glad Leighton said something about the fungicides. So, Sonia, would you like, or Mario, one of the two, like to talk about what's coming up in the summer with these virtual meetups?
Actually, Emily will wrap us up
Emily,
here.
I'm sorry. I
that's
don't
okay.
have my list in front of me.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So thank you all. Firstly, thank you all to our panelists who gave your time and expertise sharing what you're seeing in different regions. We really appreciate your perspective and sharing with this group and taking the time to do that. So thank you. And thank you to the other folks on the team, part of the Virtual Orchard Meetup Series team. Really appreciate your time too planning this event. So Lee actually he already did a great job mentioning the heat school that's coming up. But Sonia, if you have a slide, thank you, that you want to put up. So this will be the next event related to the topic of heat-related stress. So it's going to be on March 11th. So it is in person in Washington. And then Lee mentioned these virtual hubs in partner states like Michigan and Oregon, Pennsylvania, and New York. So there's the registration QR code, and you should be receiving links too from extension educators. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. We can answer those, or email Sonia directly, and she can get you some more information for that. And then stay tuned for the next series for the Virtual Orchard Meetup. So that will happen this summer. So we'll be talking about some more in-season topics related to heat, and really at that time we'll all be in the mindset of what's going on in the field and what we're experiencing this coming season. So stay tuned for that information. We'll have speakers lined up and more panelists to give their perspectives and their solutions and challenges with what we'll experience in 2026. So if you could stay on for a few more minutes, we have a short survey to ask about the program and get your feedback on the webinar today. So if Sonia, you could put that up as well. And thank you again for your time. I see Sonia put the registration information for the fruit school in the chat as well. But if you could just stay on for a few minutes to complete that survey. But thanks everyone for joining us today on a Friday.
Yeah, the survey will actually pop up as soon as you leave the Zoom meeting. So please take a minute. It's really short, and we really appreciate your thoughts to help us improve moving forward.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists.
Thank you for putting this on. It was very insightful.
Thank you.
Thank you.